Welcome to the deep dive. You know, we like to take these kind of complex topics and really get into it. Today, we're going to be looking at William Lewis Reece,
Oh, yeah?
a convicted serial killer.
Wow.
And our source material today is going to be excerpts from his Wikipedia article.
Okay.
And, we always kind of ask that same question, right? Like, how can somebody seemingly ordinary turn into, a monster?
Right. It's a question that's plagued, criminologists and psychologists for centuries.
Yeah,
What transforms a person into a predator?
right,
And it's rarely just one thing.
right.
Usually a very, complex interplay of nature and nurture.
Yeah, it's like putting a puzzle together.
Absolutely.
And, we're always looking for those, missing pieces.
Right.
So let's start with Reese's early life. Born in Oklahoma in 1959,
Okay.
one of 13 siblings.
Wow.
Yeah, so, just right off the bat, I can imagine growing up in a house with that many people, with the, financial struggles that the article mentions.
Right.
Must have been incredibly challenging. He
Yeah.
ended up dropping out of school after ninth grade, and he worked as a farm laborer.
And that's where we often see, those first cracks in the foundation.
Yeah.
A lot of studies have shown there's a correlation between adverse childhood experiences
Right,
and a predisposition to violence later in life.
right.
And, it's really important to remember that this is never an excuse for criminal behavior.
Yeah, of course.
But understanding those early influences can really help unravel that psychological tapestry of a serial killer.
It's like we're trying to look at, a poisonous plant. Like what are those root causes?
What conditions
Yeah.
led to this thing, flourishing?
Exactly. Now, the article also mentions that Reese was married young, divorced twice,
Oh, wow.
and exhibited patterns of heavy drinking and domestic abuse.
Okay.
So that kind of paints a picture, right, of somebody that's struggling with relationships
Right.
and also just their own emotions.
Emotional regulation.
Yeah,
Exactly. And these patterns of, escalating aggression
right,
and not being able to form healthy attachments are often, warning signs.
right.
And the alcohol could also be a form of self-medication.
Oh, interesting.
Just trying to numb the pain and rage
Right.
that might be driving those violent tendencies.
So the seeds were already there.
Right.
And then in 1986, he kidnaps a 19-year-old woman.
Oh, wow.
And this is chilling. The woman was the daughter of a sheriff's deputy.
Gosh.
So it's almost as if he was taunting the system that was supposed to, be stopping him.
Right.
But thankfully, she managed to escape, and Reese was arrested.
Okay.
But then, and this is unbelievable, he was released on bail.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, I can't.
That's a turning point.
Yeah.
And one that really raises a lot of questions about, our justice system.
Right.
And its ability to, assess risk.
Yeah.
Releasing somebody who has a blatant disregard for the law
Yeah.
and the safety of others is a failure that could have dire consequences.
And it did,
Yeah.
because while he was out on bail, he sexually assaulted another woman.
Wow.
So this time, he was sentenced to 25 years
Okay.
for both rapes.
Right.
But hold on, the story gets a little bit more unbelievable.
Oh, no.
His sentence was reduced due to procedural errors,
Oh, wow.
and he was paroled in 1996.
This is, unfortunately a reality of the legal system.
Yeah.
While these procedural safeguards are in place to, ensure fairness,
Right.
they can sometimes lead to outcomes that feel deeply unjust,
Of course.
especially for the victims.
Right.
It's a very delicate balance
Yeah.
between upholding individual rights and protecting society from dangerous individuals.
And in this case, those scales tipped in favor of a predator.
Right.
In 1997, Reese moved to Houston, Texas.
Okay.
A new city, a fresh start, right?
Right.
A chance to disappear.
Yeah.
But sadly, his dark impulses followed him.
Right.
He quickly became the prime suspect in the disappearances of 3 teenage girls in the area.
And relocation is a tactic that's used often for serial killers.
Right,
It allowed them to break ties with their past
right.
and operate with that cloak of anonymity,
Yeah.
preying on unsuspected communities.
Yeah, and this move to Texas marked the beginning of a really terrifying chapter in Reese's story.
Right.
But before those cases could even be fully investigated, he was convicted of another horrifying crime: the kidnapping and attempted rape of 19-year-old Sandra Sapah, and the details of her escape are just harrowing. She jumped out of his moving truck,
Gosh.
sustaining serious injuries.
Oh, wow.
But thankfully, she survived to testify against him.
Sandra Zappa's story is a testament to the strength and the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah,
I mean, she faced unimaginable terror and fought back with incredible courage.
absolutely.
And her testimony was just crucial
Yeah,
in securing Reese's conviction,
right.
a 60-year sentence,
Yeah.
which at the time seemed like it might finally put an end to his reign of terror.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
But as we'll soon discover, this was just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow.
The story of William Lewis Reece is far from over.
Okay.
And with the arrival of, DNA technology,
Right.
a whole new chapter of horrors was about to be revealed.
And that's where we'll pick up next time.
Okay.
The power of DNA evidence, those chilling confessions, and the agonizing wait for justice for the families that never gave up hope.
Stay tuned. Okay, so we left off with Reece, behind bars,
Right.
seemingly, contained.
Right.
But as we get deeper into his story, we're going to find out that 60-year sentence
Yeah.
was really just the beginning
Wow.
of a much larger and much more horrifying puzzle.
So DNA technology emerges in the early 2000s.
Right.
It revolutionized criminal investigations,
Yeah.
Particularly cold cases. And it offered a new way to identify perpetrators and bring closure to families that had been, denied justice for so long.
Right, and in Reese's case, it blew the case wide open.
Wow.
Reece, along with tons of other convicted felons,
Right.
had to give a DNA sample
Okay.
for CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System.
Okay.
So think of it as like a giant national database
Okay.
that lets law enforcement match DNA evidence from crime scenes to, known offender.
It's a powerful tool that has
Yeah,
led to so many convictions and exoneration.
for sure. And in 2015,
Yeah.
Reese's DNA sample
Okay.
got a hit,
Wow.
a cold case from 1997,
Okay.
the murder of 19-year-old Tiffany Johnston in Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
And this is where it gets even darker.
Okay.
Reece knew Tiffany Johnston.
Oh, gosh.
He knew her mother. They were acquaintances.
Wow. That's
Yeah, so it's just this chilling reminder that evil can really lurk
right.
in the shadows of familiarity.
Yeah.
It just shatters that sense of safety that we think we have.
Right. It really does add a layer of premeditation and cruelty.
Yeah.
That's what's disturbing.
Yeah.
It suggests that Reece wasn't just some, random predator,
Right.
but that he actually chose his victims very carefully.
Yeah.
And maybe even, got a sixth sense of power from betraying that trust.
So he's extradited to Oklahoma
Okay.
to face charges for Johnston's murder.
Right.
And it was during this time that he made a really strange decision. He confessed.
He confessed.
But these weren't just confessions to crimes that were already, on the radar.
Right.
He confessed to 3 additional murders in Texas.
Wow. So this sudden, wave of confessions
Yeah.
really brings up a lot of questions about Reese's motives.
Yeah.
I mean, was it, is it real remorse? Was he, desperate to kind of control the story?
Right.
Or was it a calculated way to manipulate the justice system?
The victims were 12-year-old Laura Smither, 20-year-old Kelly Cox,
Okay.
and 17-year-old Jessica Kane.
Okay.
All cases that had gone unsolved for years.
Wow.
And Reece actually gave authorities a hand-drawn map
Oh, wow.
that led them to the burial sites of Kelly Cox and Jessica Kane.
Can you imagine the wait for those families?
I know.
All those years of uncertainty
Yeah.
and unanswered questions.
Yeah.
And finally, they discover their daughter's remains. I
Right.
mean, it might have brought closure,
Right.
but I'm sure it also ripped open old wounds.
Of course. Yeah.
Forcing them to confront that horrific reality of their loss.
And to make it even worse, Reece actually initially tried to make a deal. He offered these confessions if they would just take the death penalty off the table.
It seems like, it's not really true remorse.
Right.
He's just trying to save himself.
Right.
It's scary to think that
I know.
even when faced with all this evidence and the weight of his crimes,
Yeah.
he was only worried about himself.
So let's talk about these confessions.
Okay.
Laura Smither, the 12-year-old girl who disappeared while she was jogging near her home.
Right.
Reece said he accidentally hit her with his truck,
Okay.
panicked, and then later he strangled her.
So he changes his story
Right.
from an accident
Right.
to,
Well, yeah.
to intentionally strangling her.
Right.
That's pretty important.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder,
Right.
was he trying to, downplay what he did?
Right.
Or did the thought of, facing the death penalty for killing
Yeah.
a child make him admit the truth? Then there's Kelly Cox,
Okay.
the 20-year-old college student who disappeared from a payphone
Right.
outside the Denton Police Department.
Yeah.
Reece said he got into a fight with her and strangled her,
Okay.
but he denied sexually assaulting her.
Uh-huh.
And that denial of sexual assault, that's a pattern that we see over and over
Yeah,
again
that is interesting.
in his confession. So maybe he was trying to downplay, the sexual nature of his crimes.
Right.
Maybe hoping to avoid a worse punishment.
Right. Or a certain label.
Yeah.
It's important to think about the power dynamics, too.
Yeah.
Denying that sexual element.
Yeah.
Could be another way to control things,
Yeah.
to take away his victims' voices,
Right.
and rewrite the story to benefit himself.
Yeah, and we see that again in his confession about Tiffany Johnston,
Right.
the 19-year-old whose murder led to that DNA match.
Right.
Reece said he accidentally sprayed her with water at a car wash
Okay.
and then abducted, raped, and murdered her.
It's just chilling.
I
And
know.
it highlights how vulnerable women are.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get your car washed.
Right.
It seems so normal.
Right.
But in Reese's mind,
Right.
it becomes this horrifying ordeal.
And he knew Johnston's mind.
Right.
So it adds that extra layer of just evil.
Yeah, there's a complete lack of empathy there.
Yeah.
And disregard for human connection.
And finally, there's Jessica Kane,
Okay.
the 17-year-old who vanished after going out to eat with friends.
Right.
Reece said he followed her, confronted her, and ultimately killed her.
Wow.
He gave directions to her burial site,
Oh, gosh.
bringing some closure to her family after 19 years,
Right.
just wondering what had happened.
And that final confession
Yeah,
just shows the truly devastating impact of Reese's crimes.
right.
Not just on the victims,
Of course.
but on their families and on their communities.
Yeah,
The ripple effects of that violence
yeah.
is so deep, and they last for so long.
So we have this guy who
Right.
did these horrible things,
Right.
confessed to them,
Yeah.
and now faces, the ultimate punishment.
Right.
But what does it all mean?
Yeah.
What can we learn from a case like this?
That's where the deep dive really starts.
Right.
We've laid out the pieces,
Right.
the timeline, the
Right.
confessions,
Yeah,
the psychology behind it all.
yeah.
But that bigger question still remains.
Yes.
What can we take away from this to try and prevent future tragedies?
That's a question that I think we all think about.
Right.
And it's one we're going to keep exploring as we look at the trials, the sentencing, and all the questions that still remain about William Reece. We've spent this whole episode trying to understand William Lewis Reece, a man who went down such a dark path and left so much pain behind. We've looked at his early life, the violence, the confessions, and the family's long wait for justice.
Yeah, it's a case that makes us think about the nature of evil, the human mind, and how flawed our systems can be.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we still have those unanswered questions, those whys and hows.
I think one big one is how truthful were his confessions. They did bring some question, but he also tried to bargain with the authorities.
Right, like even with all that evidence against him, he still wanted to be in control.
Exactly. And that need for control, that's something we see a lot with serial killers. Like, they need to have power over others, even from prison.
Okay, so let's get into the trials. In 2017, his trial for Tiffany Johnston's murder started in Oklahoma, but then they had to delay it because they found asbestos in the courthouse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just goes to show that even when we're seeking justice, things can happen that slow it down.
And that just makes the wait even harder for everyone involved.
Right. But the trial did eventually happen in 2021, and after all those years, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to death.
Finally, some justice for Tiffany's family.
Yeah, and it shows how hard law enforcement and prosecutors worked to get that outcome.
Absolutely.
But wait, there's more. In 2022, he's extradited to Texas to face charges for the murders of Laura Smither, Kelly Cox, and Jessica Kane. And this is kind of surprising. He pleads guilty to all three and accepts a sentence of life in prison without parole.
Huh. So he fought for his life in Oklahoma, but then just accepts this sentence in Texas. It's interesting.
I know, right? Maybe he was trying to avoid the death penalty in another state. Or maybe he just wanted it to be over to take responsibility and stop all the legal battles.
We might never know for sure. That's part of what makes Reece so fascinating and frustrating. We have confessions, conviction, and yet we may never fully get him.
Yeah, and that's maybe the most unsettling part of this case. We know the terrible details, but we're still left with so many questions. We might never truly understand what drove him to do these awful things.
Right.
So as we finish up our deep dive into William Lewis Reece's life and crimes, we have to remember the people he hurt. Laura, Kelly, Tiffany, and Jessica, and the families who will never be the same.
Their stories remind us that life is precious, that hope is powerful, and that we must always seek justice for those who have been lost.
This deep dive has been a journey through a really dark part of humanity, and I think we're all left with a lot to think about. anger, sadness, and just this feeling of uneasiness.
But hopefully it also makes us want to be more vigilant, more compassionate, and more determined to make the world a safer place. A world where people like Reese are held accountable, and where the victims are remembered for who they were, not just what happened to them.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's made you think, engage with these tough topics, and most importantly, remember that every case is about real people.